Well, last time we spoke, the then U.S. President Joe Biden removed Cuba from the U.S. state sponsors of terrorism list. Now Cuba is back to square one. Some analysts criticize Joe Biden's last-minute attempt to remove Cuba from that list as just, it's just a almost like a, well, I tried my best, even though I've been in office for the last 4 years. This is the least that I can do. Saying that knowing that Donald Trump was going to reverse that decision. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think there's legitimacy in that criticism because Donald Trump, even in his term, he actually reversed the previous move by Obama. So it was predictable, and it's also very strange that Biden thought of doing it so late in his presidency. So really, there's no meaning, even if one could really look at it from a substantive point of view. But I guess it's one of those political maneuvers, and politicians, they always want to do things that sometimes you don't even know what is really the purpose. But I think here it was just to kind of put maybe Trump in a difficult position, but it was predictable that Trump was going to reverse that for sure. And one could also even see his choice of state secretary or state secretary of state, who's Marco Rubio, who's a Cuban American. And if you look at his views, you can see they are very hawkish as they describe them in international relations and diplomacy. But yeah, for me, it was quite obvious and predictable that this move was not substantive. It was done very late. And I guess it was just to maybe please a few people, especially those who were in Cuban jail that were supposed to be somehow released as part of this sort of move. And maybe from that angle, those are the people who are the beneficiaries, immediate beneficiaries of that move. However, it's clear that it had no real strategic benefit. There was nothing that we expect from it this late, and knowing also who Trump is and what he has already done before.
Mm-hmm. This is a season Trump 2.0, as some people are calling it. Do you have it in your mind that Trump may be doing things differently this time around? And why perhaps is Cuba such a bone of contention? Why is it such a big deal to keep Cuba on that list? What does America stand to lose if Cuba is removed from the list?
Well, if one is a critical observer of American sort of geopolitical moves, you realize that they use this type of measures to really sort of manipulate countries, states to dance to their tune. If you don't do so, they will do this kind of things. That's what they use sanctions for. It's an economic war technique. So in this case, even if one is to ask what is the real reason, even up to this point, there was a point where Cuba was obviously, especially historically, was supporting countries that were seen as terrorists or movements or other, for example, SWAPO, the ANC, and many of those countries where they were liberation movements that were actually fighting for their own countries. So for them, they use these kind of things to manipulate countries to make sure that they sink to their terms. And if you do something that they don't like, they would like that. So it's purely a political thing, because also, obviously, it's also ideological. Let's not obviously minimize that. But these things are mainly done to just make sure that the country that is being targeted is shifted towards American sort of policies in terms of aligning with their interests much more sort of closely. And if any country does not do so, they do this kind of measures. They take these kind of measures. So for me, the Trump presidency, this second one, I believe it will be more hawkish, if I can use the word, because now the man has nothing to lose. He doesn't have any ambition of coming back. They are only given 2 years. So he will do whatever he wants to do. And I think with maintaining this sort of issue, it keeps the pressure on Cuba to produce the kind of government leadership that they want. But I think this has not really produced that kind of effect. I mean, this has been going for a very long time, as we have indicated from the 50s up to now. They have not been able to really succeed. So, yeah.
For the benefit of our audience,
that's how I see it.
Yeah. For the benefit of our viewers, talk to us about, people are talking about, or we are talking about sponsoring terrorism. Who exactly is the recipient? If indeed Cuba is sponsoring terrorism, who is the recipient, and what proof is there to show that Cuba is indeed sponsoring terrorist activities? And what does Cuba need to do?
Well, at this stage, it seems like there's even no evidence being given, especially with regard to the charge of terrorism. The issue of sponsoring terrorism has become really meaningless, actually, as we have seen in international politics and international relations. It's just a political label that's used, but it has lost its sort of ethical, legal, and moral meaning, because those who are accusing others of sponsoring state terrorism or terrorism, they are themselves not clean of it. So for me, this kind of things is, like I said, these are just political maneuvering that different states do to, put each other under pressure when they have issues with each other, but they don't have real meaning in terms of the original meaning. Because, for example, America itself, is supporting genocide. What can be worse than that? You see? So for me, I don't see that it's a substantive issue. The real issue is just that it's an ideological problem, that America, they would prefer Cuba to be a free market economy country, and Cuba is insisting to remain Marxist and socialist. Whether it's benefiting the society, that is another issue. But what is clear is that this is a political measure that is used as a pressure.
Namibia has been one of the most, vocal members of the UN that have consistently, and yesterday again we saw the Ministry of International Relations and Cooperation, once again maintaining their position of, condemning this action by the United States. But is condemnation enough? Can countries like Namibia and others who are calling for these sanctions to be lifted on Cuba do much more than just put out statements and say, look, this thing has been going on for quite some time now? How effective are these, condemnations on paper actually are in the larger scheme of things? Well,
anyone who has observed international politics, geopolitics for a long time, realize that at the end of the day, as they say, might is right. Those who have power, economic power, military power, financial power, and diplomatic, sort of leverage, they always sort of use that to their own advantages. So countries like Namibia, we can sort of whisper, scream around and, make these kind of rhetorical statements, but we don't really have that much of influence on a global scale. However, as a moral position, I think it's important to always make one's political positions, moral position, ethical position clear, so that at least this is what you feel, this is your position you have taken. In terms of substance, I know that America have always done what they feel they need to do. In some cases, they also bend here and there, especially when other political forces that are equal measure are coming in to counterweight them. But for example, countries like Russia and China, those are the ones that can really sort of make an impact. But of course, in terms of solidarity, one obviously has to come through, because if you look historically, Namibia has benefited tremendously from the assistance from Cuba.
Absolutely.
Whether in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of political support, military support, especially when we are fighting for our own freedom. So there's no way we can not support Cuba at any rate. So, and this is a consistent position, it's not a new position. So
no, absolutely.
I think in that regard, Namibia is very consistent and has been consistent.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arma Shikongo. Unless, of course, you have final remarks regarding the issue.
Well, we also know that even in Southern Africa here, we have got the case of Zimbabwe. They've been also under sanctions. Some cases you really don't really understand why some of the sanctions are kept. But countries always find a way to become more resilient, find alternative ways of continuing with their sort of economic life, political life, or ideological sort of positions, choices. But yes, at the end of the day, we know that that's how international politics go. And at some point, you don't want to be cynical, but you want to be realistic that that's how actually this international game is played. But at the end of the day, I think it's when countries engage diplomatically that they're able to at least fight for their own interest. And at the end of the day, everyone has to do that for their own country. America is doing that for their own national interest. And it's very clear they have always done it that way.